The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Sterling mansion as Maria Rodriguez clutched her worn leather bag tighter. She had traveled 3 hours by bus from her small apartment downtown, hoping this job interview would change everything for her family. Her younger sister needed surgery, and the medical bills were piling up faster than Maria could count. The Sterling twins, Alexander and Sebastian, were known throughout the city for their incredible wealth and their impossible standards. At 28 years old, they had inherited their father's business empire worth billions of dollars. Their mansion sat on 50 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, with fountains that cost more than most people's houses and gardens, that required a team of 20 gardeners to maintain. Maria waited in the grand entrance hall, her eyes taking in the crystal chandelier that hung above her head like a constellation of diamonds. The butler, Mr. Harrison, had explained the rules with a stern voice that made Maria's stomach flutter with nervousness. The previous maid had lasted exactly 3 days before the twins found fault with her work and sent her away without pay. Alexander, Sterling, appeared first, his perfectly pressed suit making him look like he had stepped out of a magazine. His dark hair was slicked back and his cold blue eyes scanned Maria from head to toe, as if she were merchandise he was considering purchasing. Sebastian followed moments later, identical in appearance, but somehow even more intimidating with his permanent frown and crossed arms. "Another one," Alexander said to his brother, not bothering to look at Maria directly. "She looks just as hopeless as the last dozen." Sebastian nodded, picking up a white glove from a nearby table. "The marble floors must shine like mirrors. The silver must reflect perfectly. Every surface must be dust-free at all times. One mistake and you're gone, just like all the others." Maria straightened her shoulders, thinking of her sister lying in the hospital bed, too weak to even sit up properly. The doctor had said they needed the money for surgery within 2 months, or it might be too late. This job paid more in 1 week than Maria usually earned in a month at her part-time cleaning jobs around the city. "I understand, sir," Maria replied quietly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I won't disappoint you." Alexander laughed, but there was no warmth in the sound. "They all say that. The last maid said the exact same thing before she broke our grandmother's antique vase on her 2nd day. Before that, one maid left fingerprints on the piano keys. The one before her failed to iron the bedsheets properly. The twins had fired 43 maids in the past 2 years. Some lasted a week, others barely made it through their first day. The mansion had a reputation throughout. The city is an impossible place to work. Employment agencies had stopped sending candidates, and most domestic workers warned each other to stay away from the Sterling house. But Maria was different from the others. She had grown up in a house where every penny mattered, where her mother had taught her to clean until everything sparkled, where taking care of others was not just a job but a way of life. She had been cleaning houses since she was 16 years old to help support her family after their father left. "When do I start?" Maria asked, surprising both twins with her direct question. Sebastian raised an eyebrow. "You haven't heard the full list of requirements yet. The breakfast must be prepared exactly at 7 in the morning, not 1 minute before or after. The newspapers must be ironed flat and placed at precise angles on the dining table. Every book in the library must be dusted daily and returned to its exact position. The temperature in each room must be maintained at exactly 72 degrees, Alexander continued. The flowers in every vase must be replaced every 2 days, and the water must be crystal clear. The windows must be cleaned inside and outside every morning before we wake up." Maria listened carefully to every word, making mental notes of each requirement. She had cleaned much larger houses with far less help, and she had never left a job unfinished. Her mother had always told her that honest work, no matter how difficult, was something to be proud of. "I can do all of that," Maria said simply. The twins exchanged glances, clearly expecting her to make excuses or ask for modifications to the requirements like previous maids had done. But Maria stood quietly, waiting for their decision, her mind already planning how she would organize her daily schedule to meet every single demand they had listed. "Fine," Sebastian said finally. "You can start tomorrow morning at 5:30. Mr. Harrison will show you to the servants' quarters tonight. But remember, one mistake and you're gone forever. We don't give second chances." As Maria followed the butler through the endless corridors of the mansion, She whispered a small prayer of gratitude. This job might be difficult, but it was her only hope of saving her sister's life. She had no idea that her arrival would change, not just her own future, but the lives of the two bitter young men who had forgotten what kindness looked like. Maria's first week at the Sterling mansion passed like a whirlwind of impossible tasks and constant criticism. She woke up every morning at 4:30, giving herself an hour to complete the outdoor window cleaning before the twins stirred from their beds. The mansion had 87 windows, and each one had to sparkle without a single streak or spot. By the end of her third day, Maria had already accomplished what no other maid had managed to do. She had not been fired. Alexander and Sebastian prowled through the house like hunting wolves, searching for any flaw in her work, any excuse to send her away like all the others. But each morning, they found the marble floors gleaming, the silver polished to perfection, and every surface completely dust-free. "She's still here," Sebastian muttered to his brother as they sat in the dining room, reading their perfectly ironed newspapers over breakfast that had been served at exactly 7 o'clock. Alexander nodded, clearly frustrated. "The coffee is the right temperature. The eggs are cooked exactly 4 minutes. Even the flowers in the centerpiece are arranged properly." He had spent 15 minutes the night before measuring the angles of each flower stem with a ruler, hoping to catch Maria in a mistake. What the twins didn't know was that Maria had been studying their habits and preferences with the dedication of a detective. She noticed that Alexander always checked the bathroom mirrors first, so she made sure they were completely spotless. Sebastian had a habit of running his finger along the top of door frames, searching for dust, so Maria cleaned those areas twice, every day. But Maria was observing much more than just their cleaning standards. She watched how Alexander's shoulders tensed when he received business calls from his father's old partners, how he sometimes stared out the library window for hours, without reading a single page. She noticed that Sebastian kept a small photograph hidden in his desk drawer, a picture of their parents from happier times, before the accident that had made them orphans at age 21. The twins had built walls around themselves as strong as the mansion's stone foundation. They pushed away anyone who tried to get close, convinced that everyone was only interested in their money. The endless parade of fired maids was just another way of keeping the world at a safe distance, never allowing anyone to stay long enough to truly know them. On Friday afternoon, Maria was polishing the grand piano in the music room when she heard something that made her freeze in place. Someone was playing a beautiful sad melody on the piano in the tower room above her. The music drifted down through the ceiling like teardrops, filled with so much loneliness that it made Maria's heart ache. She had never seen either twin go into the tower room, and Mr. Harrison had mentioned that it had been locked since their parents died. But someone was up there pouring their soul into those piano keys, creating music that spoke of years of pain and isolation. When the music stopped, Maria quietly finished her work and went about her other duties. But she couldn't forget the sound of that piano, couldn't stop thinking about the person who had played with such raw emotion. That night, she asked Mr. Harrison about the tower room. "Master Sebastian used to play," the elderly butler said softly, his usual stern expression melting away. "Before the accident. He was quite talented, even had dreams of becoming a professional musician. But after their parents died, he locked the piano away and never spoke of music again." Maria began to understand that the twins' cruelty was not born from genuine meanness, but from a pain so deep they didn't know how else to protect themselves. They had learned to push people away before those people could abandon them, just like their parents had been taken away so suddenly. The next morning, Maria did something that no previous maid had ever attempted. While cleaning Alexander's office, she noticed a business proposal scattered across his desk, the papers covered with frustrated scribbles and crossed-out numbers. Without thinking, she straightened the papers and, using skills she had learned in her 2 years of college before she had to drop out, she organized the financial projections into a clearer format. When Alexander returned to his office an hour later, he stopped dead in his tracks. The proposal that had been giving him headaches for weeks was now laid out in a way that made perfect sense. The numbers were reorganized, the projections were clarified, and there was even a small note in careful handwriting suggesting a cost-saving measure he hadn't considered. Who did this? He demanded, calling for Mr. Harrison immediately. The maid, sir, Harrison replied. Miss Rodriguez. She was cleaning your office this morning. Alexander stared at the papers in disbelief. In all his years running the company, no employee had ever taken such initiative, especially not someone he was paying to clean floors and dust furniture. Most people were too intimidated by his reputation to offer any suggestions, and those who did were usually trying to impress him for personal gain. But Maria had simply seen a problem and quietly solved it, without asking for recognition or reward. She had organized his work because she saw that he was struggling, not because she wanted anything in return. It was an act of simple kindness that Alexander hadn't experienced in so long. He had almost forgotten such things existed. That evening, for the first time in months, Alexander felt a tiny crack appear in the wall he had built around his heart, and in the tower room above, Sebastian played his piano a little longer than usual, the melody somehow less sad than it had been the night before. 2 weeks into her employment, Maria faced her first real crisis at the Sterling mansion. She was carrying a tray of expensive crystal glasses from the dining room when she stumbled on a loose carpet edge. The tray flew from her hands, and she watched in horror as the glasses shattered across the marble floor like glittering raindrops. Mr. Harrison appeared within seconds, his face pale as he surveyed the destruction. Those glasses belonged to the Sterling family for 3 generations, he whispered. They're worth more than most people earn in a year. Maria's heart sank to her stomach. This was exactly the kind of mistake that had gotten every other maid fired instantly. She knelt down and began carefully picking up the larger pieces, her hands shaking as she thought about her sister in the hospital, about the surgery that was still desperately needed. Alexander arrived first, drawn by the sound of breaking glass. His cold blue eyes took in the scene immediately, the shattered crystal, the kneeling maid, the obvious accident that would give him the perfect excuse to send her away like all the others. But something unexpected happened. Instead of the familiar surge of anger he usually felt when staff made mistakes, Alexander found himself noticing the tears in Maria's eyes, the way her shoulders trembled as she tried to clean up the mess. For the first time, he saw not just an employee who had failed to meet his standards, but a human being who was genuinely devastated by her accident. Sebastian appeared moments later, his face already set in the stern expression that preceded every firing. But he too paused when he saw Maria's obvious distress, the careful way she was handling each piece of broken glass, as if she could somehow put the precious family heirlooms back together through sheer determination. "I'm so sorry," Maria whispered, not looking up from the floor. "I know this means I'm fired. I just want you to know that working here has meant everything to me. I'll pay you back for the glasses somehow. It might take years, but I promise I'll find a way." The twins exchanged glances above her head. Every other maid who had broken something had immediately made excuses. The carpet was dangerous, the tray was too heavy, the glasses were placed in a difficult position. But Maria took full responsibility without trying to shift the blame. Alexander found himself remembering something he had forgotten for years. When he and Sebastian were 12 years old, he had accidentally broken a vase while playing ball in the house. His mother hadn't screamed or punished him. Instead, she had knelt down beside him, helped him clean up the pieces, and explained that accidents happen to everyone. "What matters," she had said, "is how we handle our mistakes." "Stop," Alexander said quietly, his voice gentler than anyone in the mansion had heard in years. Maria looked up at him in surprise, expecting to see the familiar coldness in his eyes. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like understanding. "Accidents happen," Alexander continued, the words feeling strange in his mouth after so many years of demanding perfection. "Mr. Harrison, please help Miss Rodriguez clean this up safely, and get someone to fix that loose carpet before anyone else trips." Sebastian stared at his brother in shock. They had fired maids for much smaller infractions, leaving a water spot on a faucet, placing a book an inch out of position, serving coffee that was 1 degree too cool. But here was Alexander, showing mercy for a mistake that was genuinely costly. But the glasses, Sebastian started to protest. "We're just objects," Alexander finished, surprising himself with his own words. "They can't be replaced, but neither can people." Over the following days, something began to shift in the atmosphere of the mansion. Maria continued to work with the same dedication as before, but now there was something different in her interactions with the twins. She had seen a glimpse of kindness from Alexander, and it gave her hope that underneath their harsh exteriors, they were still capable of human compassion. She began to leave small touches around the house that went beyond her cleaning duties. Fresh flowers appeared in Sebastian's music room, chosen not for their expense but for their beauty. She learned that Alexander had trouble sleeping, so she began preparing chamomile tea and leaving it outside his bedroom door with a small note, saying it was for relaxation. The twins noticed these gestures, though they pretended not to. Alexander found himself looking forward to the evening tea, though he would never admit it aloud. Sebastian discovered that the flowers in his music room were always varieties that bloomed in the garden where he and his brother had played as children, though he couldn't figure out how Maria had known to choose them. Most importantly, Maria began to treat them not as intimidating employers to be feared, but as two young men who had been hurt by life and had forgotten how to trust. She spoke to them with the same respect she would show anyone, neither cowering in fear nor trying to impress them with false flattery. One evening, as she was finishing her duties in the library, Sebastian appeared in the doorway. He stood there for several minutes without speaking, watching her carefully arrange the books he had been reading back into their proper positions. "Why didn't you make excuses?" he asked suddenly. "About the glasses. Every other maid blamed something else when they made mistakes." Maria turned to face him, seeing something vulnerable in his expression that made her heart ache. "Because it was my fault," she said simply. "And because making excuses wouldn't bring back your family's glasses or make the situation any better." Sebastian nodded slowly, then disappeared back into the shadows of the hallway. But for the first time since their parents' death, he found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, not everyone in the world was trying to deceive them. A month into her employment, Maria received devastating news that would test everything she had built at the Sterling mansion. The hospital called during her lunch break to inform her that her sister's condition had worsened unexpectedly. The surgery could no longer wait. It had to happen within the next week, or they might lose her forever. Maria sat in the servants' kitchen, staring at her phone with tears streaming down her face. Even with her salary from the Sterling house, she was still thousands of dollars short of what the hospital required up front for the operation. Her sister was only 19 years old, with dreams of becoming a teacher and helping other children learn to read. She tried to compose herself before returning to work, but her distress was written clearly across her face. As she dusted the library that afternoon, her movements were slower than usual, her mind obviously somewhere else entirely. Alexander noticed immediately. He had become surprisingly attuned to Maria's moods over the past weeks, though he told himself it was simply because he wanted to ensure his staff was working efficiently. But the truth was that her quiet presence had become a source of unexpected comfort in his daily routine. "Is everything all right, Miss Rodriguez?" he asked, setting down the business report he had been reading. Maria looked up, startled. In all her weeks of working for the twins, neither had ever asked about her personal well-being. She considered giving a polite, professional response, but something in Alexander's expression encouraged honesty. "My sister is very sick," she said quietly. "She needs surgery and I don't have enough money to pay for it. I'm sorry if I seem distracted today." Alexander felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. He had grown up in a world where money solved every problem instantly, where the idea of being unable to afford medical care was as foreign as traveling to another planet. But looking at Maria's genuine anguish, he was confronted with a reality that millions of people faced every day. That evening, Alexander did something he hadn't done since his parents died. He sought out his brother for a conversation that wasn't about business. He found Sebastian in the tower room playing a melancholy piece that seemed to match the gray sky outside. "We need to talk," Alexander said, sitting down on the dusty piano bench beside his twin. Sebastian's hands stilled on the keys. "About what?" About Maria. About what we've become. Alexander's voice was quieter than Sebastian had heard in years. Do you remember what Mother used to say about using our wealth? Sebastian's jaw tightened. They rarely spoke about their parents, and never about the lessons their mother had tried to teach them about responsibility and kindness. That was a long time ago. She used to say that money was only valuable if it was used to help others, Alexander continued, that we were blessed with wealth not to hoard it, but to share it with people who needed it more than we did. And, look where kindness got our parents, Sebastian replied bitterly. They were coming home from a charity event when they died. If they had stayed home instead of trying to help others, they might still be alive. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, understanding his brother's pain, because he felt it too. They had both decided, after their parents' death, that caring about others only led to heartbreak. It was safer to keep everyone at a distance, to never allow themselves to feel attached to anyone who might be taken away. But Maria had somehow slipped past their defenses without even trying. She hadn't pursued them for their money or tried to manipulate them with false kindness. She had simply done her job with dedication and treated them with genuine respect, asking for nothing in return. Maria's sister's going to die if she doesn't get surgery this week, Alexander said simply. We spend more money on flowers for the garden than she needs to save her sister's life. Sebastian's hands found the piano keys again, playing a few soft notes. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe it's time we remembered who our parents raised us to be. The next morning, Maria arrived at work with red-rimmed eyes and a heavy heart. She had spent the entire night trying to figure out how to raise the money for her sister's surgery, calling every bank and loan office in the city. But without collateral or a co-signer, no one would help her. She was cleaning the dining room when Mr. Harrison approached her with an envelope bearing her name in elegant handwriting. From the Masters, he said simply, though his usually stern expression had softened considerably. Maria opened the envelope with trembling fingers, expecting perhaps her final paycheck and a dismissal notice. Instead, she found a cashier's check for an amount that made her gasp aloud. It was exactly what she needed for her sister's surgery, down to the penny. There was also a simple note. For your sister's surgery, no repayment necessary. Consider it a bonus for exceptional service. A&S Sterling. Maria sank into the nearest chair, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't name. In all her life, no one outside her family had ever shown her such extraordinary kindness. The twins, who had a reputation for being heartless and cruel, had just saved her sister's life without being asked, without expecting anything in return. She found Alexander in his office an hour later, still clutching the check in her hand. Sir, I don't know what to say, she began, her voice thick with gratitude. Alexander looked up from his desk, and Maria was surprised to see something almost vulnerable in his expression. Say you'll use it to save your sister, he replied quietly. That's all the thanks we need. But this is so much money I could never repay you. We don't want repayment, Alexander said, echoing words his mother had spoken years ago. We want your sister to live. We want you to not have to worry about this anymore. As Maria left his office to call the hospital, Alexander felt something he hadn't experienced in 7 years. For the first time since his parents' death, he felt genuinely happy about something he had done. And in the tower room above, Sebastian played a melody that sounded more like hope than sorrow. The week following her sister's successful surgery marked a turning point in the Sterling mansion that no one could have predicted. Maria returned to work with a lightness in her step and a smile that seemed to brighten every room she entered. Her sister was recovering beautifully, and the doctors were optimistic about her complete recovery. But the real change was happening in the twins themselves. Having broken through their own barriers to help Maria, Alexander and Sebastian found themselves seeing their world differently. The mansion that had felt like a fortress designed to keep others out now seemed more like a prison that was keeping them trapped inside. Alexander started joining Maria for brief conversations during her work, something that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. He discovered that she had been forced to drop out of college to support her family, despite being an excellent student with dreams of becoming a business manager. Her insights about his work, which had started with the reorganized proposal, continued to impress him. "You have a natural talent for organization and problem-solving," he told her one afternoon as she helped him arrange some complex financial documents. "Have you ever considered returning to school?" Maria paused in her sorting, a wistful expression crossing her face. "I think about it sometimes, but my family needs the income, and school is expensive. Maybe someday when my sister is fully recovered and can work too." Alexander filed this information away in his mind, already beginning to formulate a plan that would have shocked his former self. Sebastian, meanwhile, was undergoing his own transformation. One evening, as Maria was cleaning the tower room, he appeared in the doorway with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. "Would you like to hear me play something?" he asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Maria set down her cleaning supplies immediately, understanding the significance of this moment. Sebastian had never played for anyone since his parents died, and the fact that he was offering to share his music with her felt like the greatest gift she could receive. "I would love that more than anything," she replied softly. Sebastian sat at the piano bench, his fingers hovering over the keys, for a moment before he began to play. The melody that filled the room was different from the sad, lonely pieces Maria had overheard before. This music spoke of healing, of hope slowly returning after a long winter, of walls coming down stone by stone. When he finished, they sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. "It's beautiful," Maria finally said. "You're incredibly talented." "I used to want to be a concert pianist," Sebastian admitted, the words coming out in a rush as if he was afraid he might lose his courage. "Before our parents died, I had auditions scheduled at music schools, but after the accident, music felt too painful. It reminded me of all the dreams that died with them." "Maybe the dreams didn't die," Maria suggested gently. "Maybe they were just sleeping, waiting for the right time to wake up again." Over the following weeks, the atmosphere in the Sterling mansion underwent a complete transformation. The twins began treating their staff with respect and kindness, offering fair wages and reasonable working conditions. Word spread quickly through the city's domestic worker network, and for the first time in years, people were eager to work for the Sterling family. Alexander started a scholarship program at the local community college, quietly funding the education of students who showed promise but lacked resources. Sebastian began giving piano lessons to children from the neighborhood, rediscovering his love of music through their enthusiasm and natural talent. But the most significant change was in their relationship with each other. The twins, who had been isolated in their grief for so long, began talking again, sharing memories of their parents and dreams for their future. They realized that in trying to protect themselves from pain, they had also shut out all possibility of joy. Maria watched these transformations with wonder and deep satisfaction. She had never set out to change the Sterling twins. She had simply treated them with the same kindness and respect she showed everyone in her life. But in doing so, she had reminded them of the people they used to be, the people their parents had raised them to become. One morning, Alexander approached her with a proposal that would change everything. "Maria, I've been thinking about your situation," he began, his formal tone not quite hiding his nervousness. "Your talents are wasted on cleaning and housekeeping, though you do both excellently. I would like to offer you a position as my personal assistant and business manager. The salary would be substantial, and the company would pay for you to complete your college degree." Maria stared at him in shock. "Sir, I don't understand. I'm just a maid." "No," Alexander said firmly. "You're an intelligent, capable woman who has been taking care of others your entire life. You've proven you can organize complex information, solve problems creatively, and handle responsibility with grace. You've also shown us something we had forgotten existed: genuine kindness without ulterior motives. But what about my cleaning duties?" Alexander smiled, an expression that transformed his entire face. "We'll hire other maids, good ones who will treat with respect and pay fairly. You've taught us that employees work better when they're valued as human beings, not just as servants. Maria felt tears prick her eyes as she realized that her life was about to change in ways she had never dared to dream. Not just her life, but her sister's future, and possibly the lives of many others who would benefit from the twins' rediscovered compassion. "I accept," she said simply, her voice thick with emotion. As she shook Alexander's hand, sealing their new professional relationship, Maria couldn't help but think about the incredible journey that had brought them all to this moment. She had come to the Sterling mansion as a desperate young woman hoping to earn enough money to save her sister. She was leaving her role as a maid to become something she had never thought possible, but more importantly, she had helped two broken young men find their way back to the light, proving that sometimes the most impossible things are achieved not through force or manipulation, but through simple, consistent kindness. 6 months later, the Sterling mansion had become a place that would have been unrecognizable to anyone who had known it during the dark years following the twins' parents' death. The halls that had once echoed with tension and fear now rang with laughter and conversation. The staff worked with genuine enthusiasm, proud to be part of an organization that valued their contributions and treated them with dignity. Maria had settled into her new role as Alexander's business partner with remarkable success. Her natural intelligence, combined with her newly completed college courses, made her invaluable in managing the Sterling business empire. She had implemented employee wellness programs, established fair wage standards across all their companies, and helped Alexander identify investment opportunities that benefited entire communities rather than just their bottom line. The transformation in the twins themselves was perhaps even more remarkable than the changes in their business practices. Alexander had discovered that success felt infinitely more satisfying when it was achieved through ethical means and shared with others. He had become known throughout the business world not for his ruthless tactics but for his innovative approaches to corporate social responsibility. Sebastian had returned to music with a passion that surprised everyone, including himself. He had enrolled in an advanced composition program and was working on a symphony inspired by themes of redemption and second chances. His piano lessons for local children had evolved into a full music program that provided free instruments and instruction to kids whose families couldn't afford private lessons. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the twins related to other people. They had learned to trust again, to open their hearts to friendship and connection without constantly fearing betrayal or abandonment. The walls they had built around themselves had crumbled, replaced by bridges that connected them to their community and to each other. Maria's sister had recovered completely from her surgery and was now studying to become a nurse, inspired by the care she had received during her illness. She often visited the mansion, and her bright laughter could be heard echoing through rooms that had been silent for too long. One evening, as autumn painted the mansion's gardens in shades of gold and crimson, the twins invited Maria to join them for dinner in the main dining room, something that would have been scandalous during their previous lives but felt perfectly natural now. They were no longer employer and employee, but partners and friends who had weathered storms together and emerged stronger. "I've been thinking," Alexander said, as they shared dessert and conversation, "about starting a foundation, something focused on helping families facing medical crises like your sister did." "That's a beautiful idea," Maria replied, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "We could provide emergency funds, help navigate insurance complications, maybe even partner with hospitals to create payment plans that don't bankrupt families." Sebastian nodded thoughtfully. "I could organize benefit concerts. Music has always been about bringing people together, and this would give my playing a deeper purpose." As they discussed their plans late into the evening, Maria reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them all to this point. She had arrived at the Sterling mansion as a desperate young woman with no options left, expecting to face impossible employers who would probably fire her within days. Instead, she had discovered that underneath their harsh exteriors, Alexander and Sebastian were simply two wounded souls who had forgotten how to trust and be trusted. Her genuine kindness, offered without expectation of reward, had reminded them of the people their parents had raised them to be. The maid who was supposed to be impossible to please had turned out to be the catalyst for a transformation that rippled far beyond the mansion's walls. The twins' renewed commitment to kindness and social responsibility was creating positive changes in hundreds of lives through their businesses, their foundation work, and their personal relationships. Years later, when people told the story of the Sterling twins, they no longer spoke of two bitter young billionaires who fired every maid and isolated themselves from the world. Instead, they told of two men who had found their way back from darkness with the help of a remarkable young woman who proved that sometimes the most powerful force in the world is simple, consistent kindness. Maria never returned to cleaning floors or polishing silver, but she often thought about those early days when every task felt like a mountain to climb. She had learned that the most important work isn't always the most visible work, and that changing someone's heart can be more valuable than any salary or title. The Sterling mansion still stood on its 50 acres of beautiful grounds, but it was no longer a fortress designed to keep the world out. It had become a beacon of hope, a place where people gathered to plan ways to help others, where music filled rooms that had been silent too long, and where three unlikely friends had discovered that the best treasures in life aren't the ones you can buy, but the ones you earn through courage, compassion, and the willingness to see the good in others, even when it's buried deep beneath layers of pain. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sunset painted the mansion's windows gold, you could still hear Sebastian playing piano in the tower room. But the melodies he played now spoke not of loneliness and loss, but of gratitude for second chances and the incredible power of human connection to heal even the deepest wounds.